What is a human being? It's a question as old as time, but there's one answer that has become especially popular recently that needs to be questioned. One idea that, if left unchecked, could lead to dangerous consequences. And that is the idea that human beings are just atoms. This idea has been expressed in various ways, but one of my favorite is found in Neil deGrasse Tyson's bold assertion that we are stardust.
We are stardust.
It is literally true that we are stardust. And we are not only figuratively, but literally stardust.
It's all stardust to me. All we are dust,
Dust in the wind.
That's what we are.
You are made of the same ingredients as those stars. We're not just poetically, we are literally stardust that achieve consciousness.
Think about what Tyson's saying here for a second. He's not saying that we're made up of stardust, or that stardust is a component part which helps form a human being. No, he's saying that we are literally stardust that has achieved consciousness, that a human being is just the atoms that were formed in exploding stars billions of years ago. This is a variation of a view called atomism, a philosophical position as old as philosophy itself. It was first articulated by the 4th century BC Greek philosopher Democritus, who claimed that all that existed were tiny fundamental particles called atoms, and that these atoms were just arranged in different patterns to get the different objects of our experience, like chairs and dogs and cats and human beings, but that all of these objects were fundamentally just the same kind of thing: atoms. And it's not just Neil deGrasse Tyson who has resurrected ancient atomism. When I was a kid, I remember being told by a friend of mine that no two things could ever really touch each other, because no matter how close you move, say, your two hands, there will always be a space between the atoms in both your hands. So no matter what it looks like, your hands will never really touch. You may have heard something similar when you were younger. The thing is, this view is presupposing that all your hands are is really just their atoms, and that all it would mean for your hands to touch each other is for the atoms in your hands to make contact. My friend, without even knowing it, was assuming atomism was true. And this idea can be found in popular fiction as well. I've never seen Star Trek, but I've been told that it's a major part of the Star Trek story that there's a machine that can take apart all of your atoms and move those atoms to another location. And that's seen to be synonymous with teleportation. And that was just accepted by people when the show came out in the 1960s, that if all of your atoms are moved to a new location, that means you're moved to a new location, so you've been teleported there. That just goes to show how popular atomism has become in the popular consciousness. And I'm going to suggest that that's a really, really bad thing. Now, here I want to back up a second and make a super important clarification. Atomism, as I've just described it, is not the same thing as atomic theory. Atomism is a philosophical position that says that human beings and everything else that exists are reducible to the atoms that make us up. In other words, that atoms are all that really exists, and that all the day-to-day things of our experience don't have any real ontological status apart from the atoms that make them up. Atomic theory, on the other hand, is a scientific theory about the nature of matter, which says that matter is made up of parts like protons, electrons, and neutrons, which interact with each other in certain predictable patterns in spaces called atoms. Now, what I really want to emphasize here is that these ideas are really separate, so that one being true does not necessarily mean that the other is true. And as far as I understand it, modern science pretty clearly shows that some version of atomic theory must be right. After all, we have photographs of atoms, and scientists have been able to manipulate matter using the findings of atomic theories to get real results, such as was done in the development of the atomic bomb, or in a much more lighthearted example, with the smallest movie ever made, where atoms were moved to look like a boy dancing. I just find that really cool. So atomic theory is true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that atomism is true. To say that atoms exist doesn't entail that they're all that makes things what they are, or even that they're the primary thing that makes things what they are. It could be that atoms are just component parts of things, that chairs and dogs and cats and dogs really are real, more real even than the atoms that make them up. But this is a philosophical question, one that forms the background of our interpretation of atomic theory and requires us to decide between a bottom-up view of being, where the parts are more fundamental than the whole, or a top-down view of being, where the whole is more important than the parts. And if it wasn't clear by now, I strongly support the second view, the one that says that everyday objects are more real than the atoms that make them up. So let me give you 3 reasons to think that atomism is false, and we're not just reducible to our atoms. Reason number 1, it's just plain common sense. For me, this is the most important point. There are some basic things that just can't be denied without going insane. Things that are so common to human experience that to say that they don't exist is to ignore 99% of our most basic human intuitions. If atomism is true, then the most basic things of our experience, chairs, dogs, cats, your next door neighbor, the tree in your backyard, are all just fundamentally the same kind of thing. Atoms. The tree wouldn't really exist as a tree, just as a collection of atoms, the same as every other collection of atoms. Your neighbor would be no different, just a bundle of atoms like the rest of the material world. This seems really, really contrary to common sense, which strongly suggests that the different kinds of things we see around us really are different kinds of things. Reason number 2. If atomism is true, the things of our experience don't undergo substantial change. This point is similar to the last one. Not only is it common sense that the everyday objects of our experience, chairs, dogs, cats, trees, etc., really exist, but it's also common sense that they undergo real, substantial change. When a chair is broken into pieces and used as firewood, that's a real change, where one kind of thing, a chair, becomes another kind of thing, firewood. This is even more obvious with living things. When a dog dies, the dog ceases to exist, leaving only the remains of what used to be a dog. A corpse is really substantially different from a living thing, from a dog in this case. That's supported both by experience and by plain common sense. But if everything is just atoms, then there's really no qualitative difference between the kind of change that a chair undergoes when it's turned into firewood and the kind of change it undergoes when it's, say, given a new layer of paint. Both make only minor changes to the atomic structure of the chair. At the atomic level, these are basically just the same kind of changes. And if a dog was just its atoms, then a living dog shouldn't be any different from a dead dog, since the atomic structure of a living dog is almost identical to that of a recently deceased dog. If we're going to say that there really is a major difference between the kind of change that turns a living dog into a dead dog and the kind of change that occurs when a dog, say, eats dinner, then we have to say that what makes a dog is more than just its atoms. Reason number 3, things don't act like their atoms do. We know what a thing is by what that thing does. We see plants growing by themselves, and we know they must be alive. We see dogs smelling for food, so we know that they're the kind of things that can smell. We see human beings deep in thought, so we know that they're the kind of things that are able to think deeply. We know what a thing is by what that thing does. When we see two things exhibiting very different behaviors from each other, we know that they're two different kinds of things. And what's interesting here is that combinations of atoms often behave very differently than their atoms do separately. Take water for an example. H2O. A combination of hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen is very flammable. It catches fire and it burns. Oxygen is almost always found in a gas because it boils at negative 292 degrees Fahrenheit. If H2O was just the same thing as hydrogen and oxygen, we would expect it to be flammable and to boil at negative 292 degrees Fahrenheit. But it doesn't. Water is famously not flammable, and it only boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Water behaves radically differently than the atoms that make it up do by themselves. This suggests that water is a fundamentally different kind of thing than hydrogen and oxygen, that there is a substantial change that occurs when two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom combine to make water. Finally, reason number 4. Atomic theory can't explain everything. If atomism was true, everything should be explainable simply through the placement and behavior of atoms. We should be able to look at any phenomena and find that it was caused by some movement of atoms. But it seems that there are some phenomena that have not only not yet been shown to be caused by atoms, but could not even in principle be caused by atoms. For example, take sentience, or the experience of different feelings and sensations. Atomic theory might be able to explain the reason why certain things appear to us as red, or why certain things make us feel angry or feel pain. But it really can't capture the sense of what it's like to see red, or to be angry, or to feel pain. These subjective experiences can't be understood by atomic theory because they go outside the bounds of what is knowable by atomic theory. This suggests that atomic theory is not all there is to reality because there are some things which it just can't explain. As I emphasized earlier, I see the first point about common sense as the most important one here. If atomism is true, then the objects of common experience just don't exist in any substantial way. That's too high a price to pay for any philosophic position. It's also potentially morally dangerous. If there's no substantial difference between human beings and the rest of the world, then there's no reason to treat humans any different from, say, dirt or grass. After all, we're all just stardust floating through space. When you think about atomism that way, you can see why I opened this video saying that it could be really, really dangerous if taken to its logical extreme. The other arguments I offered only add to atomism's intellectual price tag. Atomism just doesn't fit with the observed experience of the world, from the existence of substantial change to the behavior of compounds like water to the existence of sentience. Based on this, it seems pretty clear that if there's another viable philosophical theory that we could use to understand the ontological status of atoms, then we should take that one over atomism in a heartbeat. And as it happens, there is. Unsurprising to my long-term viewers, my preferred interpretation of atoms is the Thomistic one, tracing its origin back to the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas and adapted by later thinkers to fit the modern scientific data. Basically, this theory says that atoms are real, but they aren't as real as the stuff they make up. When atoms combine to form things, they lose some of their being, some of their ontological status, and become less real. Hydrogen is still present in water, but not as present as it is when it's off floating by itself in space. In particular, Thomas would say that being made up of hydrogen and oxygen is what we would call an accidental quality of water. That means that water is a real thing in its own right, a thing that just happens to be formed when oxygen and hydrogen come together, and that's able to be broken back down again into those parts. When water exists as water, it does not exist as hydrogen and oxygen. Those are just parts of water in the same way my arm is a part of me. Crucially, this view explains why water is able to do things that hydrogen and oxygen can't do separately. Water is just a different kind of thing than hydrogen and oxygen. It exists as hydrogen and oxygen potentially, but not actually. At least that's how I would use philosophy to sort through the data of atomic theory. I'm sure I'm going to get some strong feedback to this video, so please feel free to leave a comment below if you want to join in the discussion. I don't have as much time as I used to respond to the comments on my channel, but I do still read your comments, and I do take your feedback into account in forming later videos. Also, I have a Substack now, so if you want to see some of my more fleshed out philosophical positions, please feel free to check that out. I'll link it in the description below to make it easier for you. And if you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to my channel to help me grow and reach more people. I'm hoping to start publishing videos more frequently, but I can't do that until I know my videos will be seen, because that'll make it worthwhile. Thanks for watching, and God bless.